Hello friends, so reminder you have 3 homeworks coming up. By the way, next week is the last, unless something comes up, last week I'll be teaching. Dr. Van Overbeek will be taking over. And after today we'll be done talking about focus groups and surveys, and next week I'll be talking about these 2 other more mathematical elements of surveying. But I will be, even when I'm not teaching here, I'll be corresponding with you about your projects. And just a reminder about those projects, so most of you you're gonna have a focus group and or survey and or taste test. And for focus groups and surveys, so we're done talking about focus groups, so know that if you're doing your project on focus groups, you need to make sure in your paper it's very evident that you read the textbook excerpt on focus groups and you watched the lectures on it. I want to see the material that we did in class. That's the main way I'm testing for that material. And same thing with the internet surveys. So last class we talked about how to do some internet surveys. We're finishing up today. When you do your project, I want it to be very evident. I want it to be glaring obvious that you really read the stuff in the textbook and you listened to the lectures. Obviously, I don't want you to just regurgitate what I did. I want you to find a creative way to put it in. And it's like last time, I think the best thing to do is just, I've got the slides on Canvas. You can take notes if you want, but I would just sit back and absorb, because I think what's going to really help you is if you listen and think with me here, and then on your project when you go back and you look at the slides again and you look at the textbook material, it'll be much easier for you to come up with ideas about what kind of questions you should ask. Today I'm going to focus on the organization of a survey and how to write survey questions. And this covers certain, there's just 3 pages of the textbook excerpt covering this, and there's one really good figure 13.6, which gives you different types of survey questions you can ask and some survey writing tips. So it's not like there's a lot that I really want to see on the paper. I just want it obvious that you read this. By the way, here's a little life hack. During Breast Cancer Awareness Week, you can dress however you want as long as you're wearing pink like this. Nobody can say anything. Because if they say anything, then they're not supportive of fights against breast cancer. And then if you say, well, Bailey, that doesn't explain your Crocs. Well, I ask you this. Can you think of anything that goes better with this t-shirt than these Crocs? Checkmate, Dr. Kuhn. General format of your survey. Almost every survey you see is going to have demographic questions at the beginning or at the end. And I'm just saying end here because that's usually what I do. And as a general strategy, you want to have a decent introduction to your survey. You want to have your main questions of interest referring to your research objectives. And then you want to have your demographic questions. A little bit about the introduction. This is an introduction to a survey I did. Now this one is really lengthy and it has lots of details, and that's because it was a research survey at a public institution, and there are certain laws about how we have to do surveys. And we have to get approval from an ethical board to make sure we're doing things ethical. And so that's why on this survey you'd have things like, if you have any questions, you can reach the principal investigator here. If you have any questions, you can contact the institutional review board at so-and-so. You don't need to have this in yours because you're pretending that you work for a company, and when it comes to research in the private sector, you don't have to do all that. You don't have to do ethical research in the private sector. I encourage you to, but you don't have to. And all you really need to do is give the person's an introduction to what you're going to be asking them about. So they have some idea what's coming up, but you're not giving them too much information that you're going to sway their opinions. And so you're going to see some questions in here about elderflower tea. And this, I actually did this survey. We did it for this class. And if it was, if I was a private company thinking of trying to sell a new product that's elderflower tea, I would start just by saying, and I maybe wouldn't even say elderflower tea right off the bat, because I might be scared that some people wouldn't take the survey once they saw that. They see elderflower tea, I don't care anything about that. I'm out of here. I would just say something like, we're a company who are interested in consumer preferences for food, and we just want to ask you a few questions about what kind of foods you would like and what you think of certain foods, using just common language. And sometimes it might be illegal to survey people under 18. I don't know. We can't do it unless we get special permission. But that's why here I have a thing that says, first, are you 18 or over and want to take the survey? And if they do, they take it and go on. By the way, usually before you even get to the stage, if you're doing an internet survey, you will have hired a company to get the subjects for you. So you usually don't have to go out and find these subjects. But what you do have to do is tell the company what kind of people you're looking for. And so if you just want a representative sample of Americans, you can just say, I want the demographics of the sample to represent the nation in terms of gender, ethnicity, that kind of thing. If maybe you're targeting the Hispanic market, then you might want the company to get you a sample of people who identify as Hispanics. One time I did a survey where I just wanted Chinese, people who live in China. And so you don't have to do recruit, you just have to tell the company what kind of people you want. There's a limit to what you can do. A company, if you give them enough money, they can go out and find people who like novelty in foods, however you want to measure that. But the more you ask, and beyond things like basic demographics, the more it'll cost you. So the introduction is usually pretty easy. What I'm going to do now is talk about how you phrase questions. And there's really just writing surveys are hard on the one hand, because it really takes a lot of edits and having lots of other people looking at it to make sure it makes sense. But on the other hand, there's really not you don't need special expertise to make good judgment calls most of the time on these surveys. And so one kind of rule of thumb you always want, and this is a rule of thumb that pops up on figure 13.16, is whenever someone comes to a question, you always want them to be able to find an answer. I know that sounds obvious, but it's easy if you're not trying hard to write a question where some people will look at it and there's no answer that's appropriate for them. And so, of course, it used to be you could always just ask people, are you male or female? 20 years ago, you wouldn't even thought of anything different, but things are different now. And even if you don't care suppose you don't even like the idea of another gender, so that doesn't matter because you're dealing with people and you don't want to insult them on the survey. And so on some of my surveys, I usually go, what's your gender? Female, male, other. I actually saw one survey, there was a student dormitory that did a survey, and it was a school in a big city, and the kids were so woke that they listed every different type of gender that they forgot to list male. So, they listed everything except male. They were so keen on getting all the different alphabets people in there that they didn't even think of male. And one time I did a survey. I paid like $3,000 for it and asked people how many children they have in their household, and I forgot to give them an option for 0 children. And it wasn't just me. I had another researcher who looked at the survey, and probably like 5 different staff people, and we all had children, and just none of us noticed it. And it's easy to overlook things like that. Now, Chick-fil-A, I took one of their surveys one time, so I took a lot of snapshots of it to see how they do. They're male and female. Now, of course, Chick-fil-A doesn't want to acknowledge other genders, so instead they have a prefer not to answer. But either way, you just got to give people, they've got to have something they can click. Things like age. When Chick-fil-A was asking about age, this is my survey, this is one I did, but when Chick-fil-A did one, they had these same age categories, but they also had a prefer not to say. So a lot of times a company will always have a prefer not to say option on this survey. Me, because of my needs, I often really need people to answer that question, so I didn't give them an option, but that's a judgment call. One thing that's easy to mess up on surveys is if you're flying through it, it's easy to have one category that says 18 to 25 and another category that says 25 to 30. And if you do that and someone is 25, there's two different ones they could choose. There's two different options. And maybe that's not a big a deal, but still, you don't want people to have more than one answer when they're only supposed to select one. You don't want redundant categories. And so if you have an income category and you're going in $5,000 increments, maybe you want the increments to say household income $15,000 through $19,999, then $20,000 through $24,999, something like that. For marital status, there's no one right way of doing this. And when I did a survey like this, one thing I thought of is I wanted to know people's marital status, but I also knew that I wanted the survey to reflect the culture. And there's a lot of people that I know who they're basically married, but they call them a partner, and they're not legally married. And so I wanted to reflect those people. I want when people take a survey, unless they're really, really in an unusual category, I want them to be able to find some kind of answer that's appropriate for them. And so I have lots of different categories. I have a life partner but not married, separated but still married, never married. And then I have a other category. Not sure what that would be, but there's lots of different things people do things I don't know about, and I want to think there for them. The questions we looked at thus far are ones where people would only select one answer out of a number of possible answers. But of course, there are times when you want people to have the option to select multiple categories, and you need to make sure your survey is set up to allow that. And if you've ever done Google Forms, and I don't need to teach you how to do that, it's easy to figure out how to go from one answer to multiple answers. But when I ask about ethnicity, these are usually the categories I use so that if someone is like half Native Hawaiian and half white, they can check both of those. And of course, there's more ethnicities than you can count, so I definitely have a other category there. A survey I once took where they were asking people about what kind of cable TV they get. So what company or companies currently provide television service to your home? And maybe some people have both DirecTV and Suddenlink. And so you'd want multiple options for that. And the key, basically the key to make sure you get those questions right is when you're reviewing the questions, you want to try to put yourself in different people's shoes and think how they would answer. But then also try to find other people who are different from you to take the survey and give feedback. So usually when I'm doing a survey, I go to our secretaries and I ask them to take the survey and I say, please just, whatever you're thinking of, whatever comments you have when you're doing it, please say it out loud. And so if they're reading a question that doesn't quite make sense to them, they're like, I'm not really sure what this question is. And then for another question, they may say, there's really not a right answer for me, but this is the one that's most appropriate, so I'm going to click that. So those are just a few words about different questions for demographics. Now I'm going to give you an example of how maybe some of your internet survey questions might look. And I think last time we were talking about yours, Drendel. Is that right? And it was it was the monk fruit. Yeah, it was a drink with a monk fruit sweetener. Okay, and so this might be similar to what you would do. This is when my class studied elderflower tea. We did an internet survey on this, and so these are some questions I use for this. If you're doing, I felt like with a thing called elderflower tea, I needed some kind of decent introduction, because for some people tea means one thing, for other people tea means a lot of different things, and so I felt like I wanted some good introduction to begin with. So I have this introduction where I say, this section of the survey, and by the way, whenever you go from one section to another, it's good to have an introduction to that section. So if the demographics come after this, and usually for me, the demographics is the last section, I'll say, this is the last section. We just want to know a few demographic items about you. Please answer to the best of your ability. Here I say this section concerns food products made from an elderberry plant. Specifically, it refers to an herbal tea made from the flowers of an elderberry plant. Please note that regular tea, like sweet or unsweet tea you buy at a restaurant, is made from the Camellia sinensis plant, whereas herbal teas can be made with anything other than the Latin plant. Sometimes, this is about the right length, because if you put much more than that, people won't read it. And I felt like that was about the right amount that people would actually read. So it was important to me for them to know that when I'm talking about tea, it can be regular tea, it can also be herbal teas. And then you're going to have over 1,000 people answering these questions. And you want to know a little bit about their knowledge of this product that they're dealing with. Like, if you're doing monk fruit, it would be good to know, whether right up front or at the end, whether they had ever heard of monk fruit before. I think that makes sense, because their answers may, and especially if someone has tasted monk fruit before. I think that's important to know. So for me, I first said, have you ever heard of food, drinks, or natural medicines made from elderberries or the flowers from an elderberry plant? For some people, their only exposure to elderberries is the herbal medicine, the naturals medicine, whatever you call them, you can get at Walmart. It's an elderberry extract. It's just elderberry extract you take. It's supposed to have some good vitamins. Probably doesn't do anything. It may. But that's some people's exposure, so for them it might be medicine. For other people, they might have actually had elderberry jam. But I also know that for most people, elderberries are going to be something very foreign to them. And so I may, in my sample, want to calculate different statistics for the people who've heard of elderberries and the people who hadn't. But because elderberries can be such a different thing, I wanted to ask about it a number of different ways. So I also asked, have you ever consumed a beverage made from elderberries or the flowers of an elderberry plant? So there we're getting a little more specific about their use of them. And then, because we're talking about beverage there, not necessarily medicine or jam. And finally, have you ever consumed a tea that was made from the flowers of an elderberry plant? And that's a way, just knowing right up front, how many people have ever had something like this before. And we found that maybe about 1 out of 30 people had, which I was kind of surprised. I thought that was a lot. And so there's tons of different questions you could ask about this. I just thought 3 seemed appropriate at the time. And there's no way to really know up front. You got to start with some questions and then write the rest of the survey. Then look at the length of the survey and then ask yourself, okay, is this too long? Do I need to trim one of these questions? And you might say, how do I know if it's too long? You don't, though there's no one rule you can do. It just has to be a judgment call. So after I've collected some basic information about their knowledge of elderberries, I then had some questions like this, and these are questions we've seen a lot of, these scale questions. And what I want to do here is I wanted to get an idea of when people think of elderflower tea, what are they expecting the flavor to be like? So what I did is I said, suppose you consumed a tea that was only flavored, that's horrible wording, do better than that, by elderflowers. To the best of your knowledge, how closely would you expect elderflower tea to resemble each of the following teas? If you have never consumed elderflower tea, just provide your best guess. And so there I didn't give people an out to say, I've never had this, so I have no idea. I wanted them to guess just based on the name of elderflowers. And so some options I have: an herbal tea flavored with oranges. And then I wanted them to know whether they thought it'd be very different than, somewhat different than, neither different than nor similar to, somewhat similar to, and very similar to. So there are 7 options there. You may feel just 5 is fine. Sometimes just 3 is fine. Again, it's a judgment call. I know it's frustrating when I'm not telling you exactly how to do these things, but that's how surveys are. Another one's regular unsweetened tea you buy in a restaurant. I thought that was a good one in there. That gives us an idea of whether they think it's really different from the normal teas. And herbal teas flavored with spearmint, strawberries, and herbal tea flavored only with honey. And so by comparing it to regular tea, to spearmint, to oranges, to strawberries, to honey, it gives me an idea of what they think it will taste like. And remember, that's important because if people's expectations don't match reality, they generally don't like it. The surprises are usually not pleasant. So if they think it's going to taste different than it actually will, you want to have something on the label to correct their expectations. So most people think it's going to taste like oranges, but it won't. If it's actually going to taste like spearmint instead, you probably want to have some kind of picture on the package that suggests mint. Maybe you have the leaves of the elderberry plant on there, but you deliberately make the leaves look kind of like mint. Or maybe you just say, a minty beverage produced from the elderflower tea, something like that. And of course, whenever you have questions like this, when you have those scales, there's 2 things you all have to always do. First, you want to make sure there's a neutral option. There's a neither one there. There are select times when you might not want it, but most of the time you do. And that's because that gives people, if they just really don't know and they feel uncomfortable guessing, that gives them an out. But then also, these are balanced. So there's a similar number of difference as there is similars. So you want that balance there. Because otherwise, it's a leading question. If you have more similar categories, it kind of leads them to believe that elderflowers are going to be similar to it. And it's going to skew your results. And so again, when you're doing your survey, like after you've made your questions, I would definitely go read the material again, look at figure 13.16 again, and when you see things like in one of the writing tips, it's going to say, keep a balanced set of choices. That'll remind you, oh yeah, I need to go back. Let me make sure on all these questions everything is balanced, because those are the things I'm going to be really looking for. If you do something on the survey that I think is bad, but I didn't really cover it, that's probably not going to matter, unless it evades common sense. Okay, so this is what a political survey would look like in Russia. What do you think of Vladimir Putin as a president? And your choices are great president to greatest president. That's not very balanced. And it's also leading. When you see a question like that, that's obviously a bad question. You know that. And have you ever gotten these surveys in the mail from like Democrats or Republican organizations, and they have a survey there, and you can just tell the survey's so biased? And usually those surveys, they don't do anything with the results. They're just wanting to make you mad and to get you to express an opinion so you'll give money to them. It's usually what they're doing. It's the same thing they do when they bring someone you don't like on TV to yell at the TV. They just want you mad so you'll watch. If you do have a scale like this, it's always good to start them out in the middle. In a survey, in good survey equipment, you can have it where when they pull up the question, that's the default, right in the middle. And then they can drag it to the left or right. And remember, if you're putting together internet survey, I like you to put the questions together in Microsoft, in Google Forms. If it doesn't give you an option like this for the default, just indicate in the paper that you would make the default in the middle. So if Google Forms doesn't do something you would want it to do, just tell me what you would want it to do. Because I'm assuming in reality you would use a software like Qualtrics, but it's not, for us, it's not important enough that you actually learn the Qualtrics survey software. Another thing I wanted to know from this elderflowers is, what's the general spirit they would encounter it? And so I said here, below are some different motivations people may have for consuming elderflower tea. Which motivations do you believe are most important for people who drink elderflower tea? Please rank the motivations from the most important, rank equals 1, to the least important, rank equals 4, by moving the motivation up or down the list. And in the Qualtrics software, this would be a thing where you could just physically move them. Maybe in Google Forms, you can just have them put a 1 beside the one they like the most and 2 beside the one they like the least most, or so on. And so I have here a nice change from regular tea, pleasant taste, improves health, inexpensive. That's wanting to know, so why would people come to elderflower tea? Are they mainly doing it because they just want something different? Or do they think it might be healthy because a lot of them have seen elderberry extract in natural medicines? Or do they think it's going to taste good? That's important because that's going to help me with my marketing. If I think that they would buy elderflower tea because they think it would improve health, then that tells me that's my main target market. And so maybe I want to design the marketing around that, design the label to make it look like it promotes health. And again, remember, on the paper, one of the most important things is to explain to me why you're asking a question in a certain way. And so if you're doing a question like this, you'd explain to me why this is important for the product design. If it's for improving health, that tells me maybe I want to have the marketing in a way that's associated with health. If it's about taste, maybe I just want to have a picture of someone just really enjoying it, looking like they just really enjoy the taste. Or if it's a nice change, that tells me maybe if 80% of people saying they're doing it because they just want a nice change, well, one, that's telling me they're probably going to be buying it infrequently, just something, a novelty, and that may help us with a marketing slogan that says something like a refreshing break from normal tea or something like that. I don't have to believe your reason is good, it just has to be logical. And whenever you ask questions like this, and that includes questions like these as well, you've heard me say this over and over, you want to randomize the order of those questions. And certainly like in Microsoft Forms, like if there's a multiple choice list, you can randomize the order. And of course, maybe you like the ranking question, but maybe Microsoft Forms doesn't have the ranking question like you want. You can just have a multiple choice and ask people which of these is the most likely reason you would buy elderflowers, and you can have the randomized option there. Or maybe you want multi-select, where you ask people, check all the different reasons you would buy elderflower tea. For those of you who have some kind of idea about what the product label may look like and you want some feedback on that, this is an example of what you can do here. This was, remember, this was the product label that I was coming up with for the elderflowers. I say, suppose you went to a grocery store and saw the elderflower tea with the following label. How would you react to this label and the idea of an herbal tea made from elderflowers? And then we have some agree or disagree questions. Again, there's neutral, there's balance in the options. The label looks intriguing. The label looks feminine. I like the label. The label suggests the tea will have a pleasant taste. The label suggests the tea will improve health. And so again, what I'm going for here is I want to know if they like the label. I want to know what it suggests about the tea. Again, to help me with the marketing of it. And then some general rules about writing the survey questions regardless of the format. We said it before, don't ask leading questions. Whenever you see like comedy shows and stuff make funny surveys, there's usually a leading question. So does anybody watch Late Night with Seth Meyers? Right, where he was doing his show from the attic, and he had this picture of the sea captain, and they were doing funny things with it. And every night they'd have a poll. And so one poll was, do you enjoy the sea captain during this difficult time? Yes, he's a nice addition. No, I hate fun. Obviously, that's a leading question, much like the President Putin one. Another sample leading questions, and this is a question I actually got in the mail one time from one of these surveys that were really trying to raise money. They said, how are you concerned that Donald Trump is abusing power and undermining the rule of law in ways that have a lasting negative impact on our democracy? And that's kind of question, like, even if you were a supporter of Donald Trump, you don't want to answer unconcerned, because that makes it sound like you don't care about democracy. And if you did one about Joe Biden, it'd say, how concerned are you that Joe Biden's enabling the radical left to burn down cities and subsidize late-term abortions? Y'all have enough common sense not to write a question that bad, but what you have to do is really look at your question and second-guess yourself and say, is this leading in any way? And a lot of times, especially if it's something to do with politics, it's really hard to write those questions. For different types of food, it's usually not that hard. And notice anything else bad about this question? There's no neutral, that's right, and there's no balance. And so the only options are unconcerned and then concerned or very concerned.
You need one more option for the unconcerned.
Yeah, like a very unconcerned to get balance. And then for neutral category, you need neither unconcerned nor concerned. So you see how we keep going back to things like the balance and the neutrality. That's just such an easy way for you to get good points on the papers to make sure you have that. Don't ask double-barrel questions. Double-barrel questions is when you really put two questions in one. So if you're in China and you got a question, do you support Xiaoping's program to create economic progress and maintain national security? Well, if you're in China, you definitely want to say yes because it's China. And then second, they're asking about, do you support the program to create economic progress, and what about the program to create national security? Those can be two different things, and you generally want to separate those. There are some times when things belong together, but most of the time when you have a question like this and then you have "and," that's bad. It's a double-barrel question. It's kind of like, do you love America and enjoy Dr. Norwood's class? Clarissa, what's your answer? Do you love America? Yeah. So you go love America and enjoy Dr. Norwood's class, right? It's we're bringing in questions here that's just really exaggerated bad to show you what the badness is. And again, figure 13.6 is a thing that says avoid double-barrel questions. There's a whole paragraph about it. And so that means when I'm reading your questions, I'm really going to be looking out for that. And so that also suggests, if that's something I'm looking out for, you might want to say on this, I'm going to definitely put some questions that could be asked double barrel, but I'm separating it. So when Dr. Norwood looks at this, he says, good. They could have done it double barrel, but they didn't. Other suggestions, some of this is obvious. Make sure you're asking about the questions you need. I know that sounds obvious, but I guarantee you there's going to be 4 students in here who list something as a research objective, but never ask a question that lets them achieve that objective because they're just hurrying through it. And that's really important. That's going to be one of the main things I'm looking for. I'm going to see, what is this research objective? And then I'm going to go and I want to say, can they achieve that research objective with this protocol? Don't make the survey too long. And again, how do you know if something's too long? You just got to use your judgment. I'm guessing for this kind of thing we're doing here, you definitely wouldn't want someone to take more than 10 minutes to answer. Less than 3 minutes might be a little too short. And so 3 to 10 minutes is there. But of course, the length kind of depends on how cognitively burdensome each question is. But just use your judgment. If you use your judgment, you'll be fine. And then, demographics, you could ask so many different demographic questions. And so what I would do there is there are certain standard demographic questions that you need. And you want to look at standard demographics like, well, let's think out loud. So there's gender, what other kind of stuff? Y'all can do this. Age. Clarissa? What else makes people? Yeah, the state you're located. Yes, a lot of times you ask the specific state. And so if we're asking people on a survey, what state are you from? What options do we need to have there? So this is practice here. We don't want them to write in the state because they'll spell it differently. We want an easy answer, so we want it to be like a drop-down list. So what choices do we need there? What? All of the states and other. Yeah, because they might not be in there. They might be in D.C., might be in Puerto Rico. It might have gone to someone in New Zealand. You never know where these things will go. So we had gender, age, where they're from, what else? Ethnicity or race, yep. What's the most important thing when it comes to finding a spouse? What is it? What?
Whether you can get along
Nope. What's the most important things when it comes for a spouse? Katie? Money. You want to know how much they make. And usually you ask them, like, what's your pre-tax household income? And you have to be specific there. You can't just say, how much money do you make? You usually do it in year terms. And notice, if you don't ask pre-tax household income, you don't know exactly what you're measuring. Is it pre-tax or not? All right, so we've got, is there anything else we should have? Tons of things we could ask. Oh, so if this food, what's some peculiar things about people we may want to know about their eating habits? Yeah, might want to ask allergies, yep. Well, this is America. We eat 5 times a day. So that's, we know that. I mean, you could, I wouldn't ask it like that. But what's some other things besides like allergies that make people different and sometimes annoying? What's the annoying diets? Gluten-free, exactly. Allergies? Yeah, what's a vegetarian? Y'all in ag college, you forget they're vegetarians. Well, there's a good many vegetarians. And what's even worse than a vegetarian? Oh my God, I know. Yeah, so if it's a meat product, you might want to know whether they're vegan or not. If it's a product that involves wheat, you might want to know whether it's a number of you had milk products that had milk in there, and so you'd want to know whether they're vegetarian or vegan. And again, so when you go down to do the demographic questions, you might at first be a little confused about, well, I could do 20 different demographics. You could do marital status. You can do whether they rent a home, whether anybody in the household's unemployed. I mean, you can go on and on. But then what you have to say is, okay, remember, the most important thing for Bailey is that you ask some good questions and you have good reasons. And so when you list your demographic questions in your paper, you say that I am asking these demographic questions because I want to see how people's preferences change across different age groups, genders, and maybe ethnicities. And if you have a particular reason why age group might be important, then home in on that. See, Clarissa, were you doing the Starbucks thing? That was you? Okay, I don't know if Starbucks is kind of a... Do a lot of old people go to Starbucks or not? Or is it?
I don't think so. I feel like it's younger people mostly.
Okay, that's kind of my impression too. And so if that's your main crowd, then you may say ethnicity doesn't matter. You don't necessarily want to ask about ethnicity if you don't think it matters. Like, do you go around in normal conversations and say, what's your ethnicity, just out of the blue? No. But if it really matters, then, and so for that Starbucks thing, I think that makes sense because you may want to say, out of all my survey participants, I may want to see how the young people differ from the older people. And so, that's a pretty good reason. Just throw that out right there, and I accept it like it's gold. And again, a good survey requires lots of editing, have lots of other people take the draft surveys and provide feedback. So at a minimum, I would have 3 other people look at it. And just because it's so easy to overlook things, it's just like writing a paper. You know how like when you're editing a paper and a word is missing, but you know it's supposed to be there, and so your mind puts it in there? It's the same thing with surveys. In that instance where I didn't give people option to have no children, I knew it was supposed to be there, and I think when I was editing it, it's like my mind just put in there. That's one of my biggest problems with writing. That's why whenever I write a paper, and I'd encourage you to do this for your paper, I always have the computer read it out loud. So you can go to your computer, you just highlight a paragraph, and different computers have different shortcut keys. Mine is Alt Escape, and a nice lady who lives inside a computer reads it aloud. And I just walk around and listen to it, and then it's so obvious when a word is missing or something is written wrong. That's been a godsend for me editing. It takes time, but man, it's so easy to take off points when a student has a sentence and the sentence just stops and there's no end to it. And so when it comes to the survey, really, again, it's making sure you ask questions that achieve your objective, that they follow these general rules for writing good survey questions, and in your paper you give good reasons for why you ask them and you describe what you're going to do with them. It's not that hard, says the professor who's been doing this for 20 years. We good? Okay. We're not leaving yet, but I'm just getting fortunate. On Monday, we're going to do some things about statistical tests. And what I always like to do in this class, I know you've had statistics before, and statistics is weird. Like, no one actually learns anything from the first statistics course, even if they make an A. I was the same way. I don't know why it's like that. It doesn't matter how you teach it, it's the way that class is. We're only going to do one kind of statistical test in here, and I want you to have a really good intuition for why it works. So we're going to do a little demonstration here. Has anybody done the homework that's due tonight yet, or is willing to lie and say they did? You did it, Clarissa? Okay, you did. Well, everybody did it, right? If I say you can lie about it, okay. So there you had people were rating how much they liked pecans, right? And the scale could go from like 1 to 9, and you had a bar chart that had like the average. Okay. Suppose that you have 2 pecans, and the average rating for one is a 6.9, and the average rating for the other is 6.7. So one of them has a better rating, but it's just small. And then you say, well, is that big enough to conclude that they do like it better? Or is it so small that we think we really like them both equally? Or at least we can't really tell which one's better. Well, to answer that, we usually do like this. So let's suppose for each person who took that survey, they rated the Kanza pecan something and the native pecan something. And one person 7.6, another one 5.4, another one 8.9, and so on. And you get these average ratings, but again, one is 7.9, one is 7.6. There's a difference, but you're not sure if we can, maybe that was just randomness. Just like if I ask y'all to flip a coin 10 times and y'all to flip a coin 10 times, one of you is probably going to come up with heads more than the other, right? But is that because your coins were different? No, it was just randomness. And so sometimes in these surveys, we want to say, is a difference large enough to conclude there really is a difference, or was it caused by randomness? And to figure out how you determine that difference, I like to use the metaphor of a coin flip. And so, like, suppose y'all were people who took this pecan survey, and he gave a higher rating to Kanza. He gave a higher rating to Kanza. She gave a higher rating to Kanza. But Katie gave a higher rating to native, and so did Clarissa. But he did Kanza higher. She did native higher. She did native higher. She did Kanza higher. He did native higher. Well, what we want to say is, and suppose it comes out that 54% of people rated Kanza higher. And we want to then say, well, is that because most people actually like Kanza, or was it just randomness? And so you do a little thought experiment. You're saying, is 54 big enough to say Kanzas are better? one way I like to answer that is say, well, suppose people didn't really know and they just basically flipped the coin to determine which one they liked better. And they didn't actually flip a coin, but they just guessed. It was just random which one came up. And so we say, well, if people flip the coin to determine which one they like better, how likely is it that 54% of people would have come up with Kansas better? And if it's very likely just flipping a coin got you the numbers you got, then you say there's no difference. But if you say flipping a coin is very unlikely to give you the numbers you got, there probably is a real difference. Let me demonstrate. We're going to simulate a coin flipping exercise in Excel. So what I'm doing here is this is person one, and well, let me show you this. This let's say there's 30 taste tests, and instead of person one, I should have probably said study one. So 30 taste tests. And so we had a thing where 30 people tasted the Kanza, 30 people tasted the native. They gave ratings, and they told us which one they liked better. Then I say, okay, how different would that be than if they just flipped a coin to determine which one they liked better? So that's what we're simulating here. So we have 30 people taking a taste test, and we say, suppose they just flip a coin or just randomly choose which one they like better, and both have an equal probability. Well, that's what I've done here. I have a random number generator where there's a coin flip. And in this particular instance, only about 37% of people came up with heads. It's possible. Now, on average, it's going to be what percent? 50. And so, we can keep doing this over and over. Why isn't this changing? So, if we did another taste test, it might be 54%. Another taste test might be as high as 77%. There, it's right on 50%. Well, what we're really doing with statistical tests is we're saying to ourselves, okay, we did this one taste test with 30 people, but suppose we did another taste test with another 30 people and another 30 people, did over and over. What's the different range of estimates we would get? Well, if they were just flipping a coin to determine which pecan they liked better, we can simulate that. So that was one study where people were determining which pecan they liked better by flipping a coin. Suppose we do 100 studies. And of course, we'll get a large range of things. So sometimes 64% of people will get heads. And let's just say heads is like when you prefer Kanza. So you flip a head, that's when you prefer Kanza. So sometimes 64% of people will like Kanza better, sometimes 40%, sometimes 47%, sometimes 43%, sometimes 63%. And it's possible that 100% of people flip a coin and get heads, and 100% of people randomly say they like Kanza better. That's very, very unlikely, though. And so here's what we're usually doing with a statistical test. We come in here and we look at all these different outcomes. Remember, this was 100, was simulated 100 different studies. Sometimes they were as low as 33%. Sometimes they were as high as 73%. Now here's the question. So we had in our actual, this was a simulation of all the different things could have of people randomly choosing which one they like better. Suppose in our real study, only 54 people, 54% of people said they liked Kansa better. How likely would we be to get that 54% if people were just choosing randomly? Again, these are the different outcomes. So we got 54%, but if they were choosing randomly, well, in our simulation, that could have happened, that happened 17 times in the simulation. So that could have happened 17 out of 100 times. So there was a 17% chance that that could have happened randomly. So again, we had this sample of people, 30 people, they tasted pecans. 54% of people said that they preferred the Kansa. And we're trying to say, is that real or could it have been caused by randomness? And then we say, well, they were just flipping coins to determine this. The probability of getting 54% or higher liking Kansas, 17 out of 100, 17% is 17%. And in statistics, that's usually, we consider that too high. You remember that confidence region thing, like a p-value? Okay. What you're usually doing there is you're saying, okay, anything we do in a taste test, any result could have been a result of randomness. But we want it very, very unlikely that it could have been caused by randomness. And generally, the confidence region we use is 5%, meaning what we're saying is that I only want to say people like Kansa better if there's only a 5% chance or less that it could have happened randomly. And the way you do that well, the 5 highest percentages, the 5 most unlikely percentages in terms of largeness were these. And so generally, there's only, if people were choosing pecans randomly, there's only a 5% chance that you would find 63% or more people liking Kansa. And so what that tells you is that it gives you a rule. You can say, I'm going to conclude people like Kansa better so long as the percent of people who choose Kansa is 63% or higher. Because when I do that, I know that it's very unlikely to have been caused by randomness. Very unlikely there means 5%. So that threshold I chose is 63%. I only measured 54% of people liking Kansa better. Therefore, I conclude we don't know. People like Kansa natives about the same. We can't really conclude that people like Kansa better. I know not all of you got what I was saying there. We are going to do it again, but I honestly never understood statistical tests until I saw it in this light. And these probabilities that we're talking about, you don't have to go to it now, but we're going to do Monday. In the textbook excerpt, I give you probabilities for this kind of thing. Like here, I've got in there, it says number of coin tosses. 95% of the time, a coin toss will result in a head, a maximum of 63% of the time. And I'm going to show you how to use that table. Lauren? You ready to go? Okay. All right, we're going to go. I'll see you Monday.